Dragon Quest has been brilliantly revisiting its past, but what does its future look like? Let's talk about it. Hey friends, it's Just the Gems. I'm Brandon, and as I record this video, in just a few days, Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D Remake will be hitting shelves, and I'm sure if you're a Dragon Quest fan, like I am, you are ecstatic. This is the follow-up to Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D Remake, which was the previous winner of the Worst Video Game Name Award. I have a feeling, just by nature of its length, Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD 2D Remake will be taking the crown this fall. But terrible naming convention aside, Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D Remake was pretty universally acclaimed for being just a spectacular recreation of Dragon Quest 3 on modern hardware. We also learned not too long ago that Dragon Quest 7 is being remade as well. It seems to me that Dragon Quest has been spending a lot of time sort of revisiting and revitalizing the games that made it what it is. And I think that's great. It's way too difficult to play old games. Like, I sat down not too long ago and played Dragon Warrior 2 on the NES, and I can do that because I have a clone console and I have the cartridge, so it's easy enough for me to plug it in and play it. But most people won't go that far. Even if they're interested, like, it's just too much of a hassle to do that. There's emulation, of course, but not everybody wants to do that. It's not always the simplest thing to do. I, for one, every time I try to do emulation, I have some issue with something, usually audio, that just drives me up the wall and I can't figure out how to fix it. So I totally understand why, if you don't have the hardware, you also might not want to go the emulation route. So remakes are a great way for people that are nostalgic for an older game to go back and revisit it, and for new people to get on board, right? Now, if you took a game like Dragon Quest 3 and just gave it a visual upgrade, but had everything else be basically the exact same as it was on the Nintendo Entertainment System, I don't think you'll probably be winning too many new fans, right? Game development philosophies have evolved. And so, rightly so, the Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D Remake developers gave the game more than just a visual overhaul, right? They gave it a complete rebuild from bottom to top, right? They just created the game brand new and had it meet, modern design sensibilities. And presumably the same is going to be done with Dragon Quest 1 and 2. We'll see when the game hits shelves. So Square-Enix is spending a lot of time thinking about the past, remaking the previous entries in the game, but we know that Dragon Quest 12 is coming. Now, Dragon Quest has always been about tradition. I guess you could argue that with the exception of Dragon Quest 1, every Dragon Quest game has been about tradition. DQ1 was like establishing the tradition, and every game since has kind of stuck to that. But as time goes on, and as we lose the developers that started the Dragon Quest series in the first place, does the series change, right? Like, can it possibly be the exact same without Akira Toriyama doing the character designs, without Koichi Sugiyama doing the music? Those two, unfortunately, have passed away, so we're not going to get any new work from them. So the new Dragon Quests in the future are not going to have work provided by them. Fortunately, we still have Yuji Horii with us, and that's great, and he's obviously still very involved in the series and running things. But at some point, we're not going to have Yuji Horii anymore. Does the Dragon Quest series go away? I don't think so, right? Like, I don't think Square-Enix is going to just let Dragon Quest go. They're not going to push it out to sea with like a Viking burial, right? Like, they are going to continue running the series because it's insanely popular, especially in Japan, but increasingly so in the West. They would be fools to end the series. But for a series that's so based on tradition, without the original creators running it, what happens? Is it even possible for it to stay the same? And do we want it to? And assuming that it has to change, how should it change? Now, let me give you a little bit of my personal history with Dragon Quest real quick so you can kind of see where I'm coming from. Oh, and if you don't care about my personal history with Dragon Quest, that's fine. There's chapters in the video, so go ahead and skip right to the controversy. Cool. My first JRPG was Dragon Warrior on the Nintendo, right? It showed up at my house one day because of Nintendo Power, and I popped it in and I was completely blown away, right? I had been previously playing games that were, 2D platformers, and they were amazing. I love Super Mario Brothers, Batman, DuckTales, all these games, right? Like, I was a big fan of 2D platformers in the 8-bit generation. But Dragon Warrior did something completely different. Like, it gave me an entire world to explore. I was walking through forests and over mountains and into caves and going to towns and castles. And it was just like, this was mind-blowing for a kid my age, right? How old would I have been? 6 or 7, maybe? Like, I was really young, and this was very early in my video game playing career, right? So this was just revolutionary, and it wasn't obviously just revolutionary for me, it was revolutionary for everyone, for the entire industry. Now, I'm not going to say, it's obviously not the first role-playing game on a video game console or a computer, right? Dragon Quest was really influenced by a lot of Western role-playing games, wizardry, and there's a whole lot that's been written about that. But it was really the first JRPG in my mind. I know there's arguments that could be made against that, but to me, especially in the West, it's the first JRPG. Now, I was a dumb little kid, so I never finished Dragon Quest, Dragon Warrior, on the NES. I don't know that I even got particularly far. I know I had the strategy guide. I'm pretty sure I had the strategy guide, and I was able to do some of the more esoteric things because I had the guide to tell me what to do. But I don't think I ever even got to the castle, to the Dragon Lord's castle. I'm pretty sure I didn't. But, regardless, like, it still meant a lot to me. It was still a really, like, fortifying experience in my mind for, like, establishing the sort of games that I would come to like. Now, for whatever reason, I never played the other 3 Dragon Warrior games on the Nintendo. Completely skipped them. I knew they existed. I remember reading about them in Nintendo Power, right? I was an avid Nintendo Power reader, and I would see these games and I would be intrigued by them, but I never went so far as to ask for them for my birthday or for Christmas for whatever reason. The only thing I can think is that maybe I was intimidated, right? I knew how hard Dragon Warrior was, and I was like, this is going to be too hard for me. It's just way out of my wheelhouse. I just can't handle it. And so after that, it just kind of faded from my awareness, right? And it didn't help that, on the Super Nintendo, we never got Dragon Quests 5 and 6. They stayed locked in Japan until the DS remakes years later. So throughout the Super Nintendo era, I was getting into these story-based JRPGs, Final Fantasy, Lufia, Chrono Trigger, all these games that just really kind of further established my love of JRPGs. Dragon Quest was the furthest thing from my mind. When Dragon Quest 7 came out in America, it was still called Dragon Warrior 7 at the time on the PlayStation 1. I was not interested in the slightest, right? Like, I had already moved on to the PlayStation 2, right? The PlayStation 2 had come out like a year before almost. And this was coming out in the year, I think, 2001 on the PlayStation. And it looked like an early PlayStation game at best. So, like, here I was playing The Bouncer, right? And just being blown away by the graphics and the possibilities of what Square would be able to do with a console like this. Looking at Dragon Warrior 7 and being like, nah, brah, that ain't it. Now, a few more years would go by and Dragon Quest VIII would come out. And I did pick up Dragon Quest VIII. I was intrigued by this game. Although I think it was more this that caught my attention, right? You have Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest VIII, but you have Final Fantasy XII demo disc also. And being a giant Final Fantasy fan and not really a Dragon Quest fan, I was mostly interested in playing Final Fantasy XII. Now, irony of ironies, I ended up not really caring for Final Fantasy XII. I've talked about that elsewhere. I need to replay Dragon Quest VIII, but I believe now I most likely would prefer Dragon Quest VIII over Final Fantasy XII easily. Like, I'm sure it wouldn't even be a contest at this point. So I played a bit of Dragon Quest VIII. I thought the big, colorful world was really cool. The voice acting was fun, very British, But it didn't hook me, and I think the reason is because I wasn't old enough yet to be the right kind of nostalgic, right? Now, if I had played all the Dragon Warrior games on the NES and they were a bigger part of my childhood, maybe by the time Dragon Quest VIII came out, I would have been nostalgic for it in that proper way. But because it was such a distant memory, that first game, and because I hadn't stuck with it, I hadn't played any other games in the series, it just didn't get the nostalgia hooks in me, which I think would have helped me stick with it. So I didn't end up playing it. It doesn't help also that this game came out during the period when I wasn't playing very many games, period. Like, I still liked JRPGs, I would still buy them, but my completion rate of games during that era was pretty low because I just was kind of losing interest in video games. I had other things going on. And the next Dragon Quest game I played was Dragon Quest XI. I think Dragon Quest XI is probably most comparable to Dragon Quest VIII, and that's because 9 and 10 did some completely and radically different things, right? 9 was like a local multiplayer Nintendo DS game, and 10 was a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. So I think if nothing else, 9 and 10's existence proves that there is opportunity for Dragon Quest to change if they want it to. They're not so beholden to the established formula that they are not willing to stretch it out a little bit. And because of how much I enjoy Dragon Quest XI, that really reignited my love for the series. So I went back and I've replayed, through all of them. I haven't played 6 or 7 yet, or 8, 6, 7, and 8, but played through the first 5, really enjoyed them, and am now fully hooked on the series, really excited for the 1 and 2 remakes. I think it's just going to be fantastic. So anyway, that's my history with the series. And I really think that, with Dragon Quest XI doing as well as it did, it was sort of proof of concept that the Dragon Quest series could evolve into a modern gaming series, and it wouldn't need to do that much different than it had ever done. So now I'm just going into hypotheticals, right? We don't know anything about Dragon Quest XII. I think we learned the subtitle. We saw some burning grass in the shape of a Roman numeral 12. That was years ago at this point, and we haven't heard a peep about it since. So who knows what's going on? Chances are it, got a ways into development and they restarted or whatever. Some things have probably gone wrong and they've had to reevaluate what they're doing. I can't imagine that they would be this silent with nothing, no information, no pictures, no videos, nothing for this long if they hadn't run into some serious issues. So we could speculate all day what that's about, but what I would rather do, I think, is just talk about the ways that I think if Dragon Quest was going to change with the changing of the guard, with Yuji Horii potentially retiring at some point, right? There's no reason he needs to do this until he drops dead at his desk. Everybody deserves to have a nice retirement, and he's done a lot for video gaming. He definitely deserves a break if he wants one. So he may retire and hand the reins of Dragon Quest over to someone else. And maybe he will say to them, hey, you know what? We've established these traditions, but don't feel beholden to them. Go ahead and do what you want. Create the series, remake it the way you want it to be. Maybe I don't know Yuji Horii very well. Who knows? We'll see. But what are some things that could or should change in Dragon Quest 12, 13, and beyond? If you've watched my channel, you know what my number one change to the Dragon Quest series is going to be, and that is give us, finally, a voiced protagonist. Now, I feel slightly optimistic about this as a possibility because of some things that Yuji Horii apparently said. He said recently that, it makes the main character sound kind of dumb when everybody else is speaking like they have voiced lines and the main character is just nodding or shaking their head, and the only responses that you as a player are able to give are yes or no, right? A lot of JRPGs with silent protagonists or protagonists that don't have pre-scripted lines, they'll have dialogue that the player can choose. Dragon Quest doesn't really have that, right? It's just you can choose yes or no from time to time, and that's pretty much the extent of it. So if Yuji Horii is kind of acknowledging that this is weird, that there's this strange dichotomy that's going on here between this kind of richer, more developed storytelling and this traditional silent main character, it just doesn't fit anymore. It doesn't seem to work the same as it used to. I think the idea of the silent protagonist was to create sort of an avatar that you, the player, could embody. And if I'm not mistaken, I would suggest that this trend, this belief, comes from more Western RPGs, right? In Western RPGs, it is kind of rare to have a voiced protagonist. You're going to typically see a silent protagonist where you are choosing dialogue options and making a lot of decisions throughout the game. So I understand that as a template, using that as a template to create Dragon Quest, that it would have made sense for the protagonist to be silent, to not have anything to say of their own, right? The issue is that Western RPGs are kind of defined by the amount of choices you can make as a player. Dragon Quest is famous for, but thou must, right? This idea that even though you are given a choice to say yes or no to certain things, you have to choose the proper answer or the game won't continue. So you don't actually have choices to make as a player in Dragon Quest, but your character is still designed as though you do. And so that creates this sort of tension between the player and the game that, I don't know about you, but prevents me from feeling like I'm embodying the character because I don't have any choice. Instead, I'm just a soulless, voiceless, personalityless drone that is walking through the game, sleepwalking through the world, right? A main character also can't be important to the story if they are voiceless. Let me explain what I mean by that. So if a main character is sort of just an empty shell of an avatar that the player is supposed to quote unquote embody, that can work in a game where the important things are happening around the main character and the team surrounding the main character, not directly involving the main character. A good example of this being done right would be Yuji Horí's own Chrono Trigger. A bad example of this being done wrong is Chrono Cross. So let me just break this down real quick. In Chrono Trigger, the character of Chrono is silent, and I'm 99% sure that was Yuji Horí's decision, right? That's kind of been his MO for a long time. Chrono was silent, surrounded by a rich cast of characters. With the exception of one event, really, over the course of the whole game, Chrono as a character is completely unimportant. He could not be there, and it wouldn't change the events of the story. He is, I don't want to say meaningless, I don't want to come off as flippant, but he is not a vital character to anything that happens in the plot. Like I said, with the exception of one thing, okay? And if you played the game, you know what I'm talking about. Chrono Cross, on the other hand, completely fails at this by having Serge, the main character, be both silent and pivotal to everything that is going on in the story of this game. I'm not going to go into details for spoiler reasons, and also because it would take so long and nobody would understand it anyway because it's crazy. But suffice to say, the storyline of Chrono Cross is fully dependent on Serge as a person. The things that he does, the things that happen to him, he is the key component of the story. And it falls flat because he is silent. He has no personality. He has no wishes, no desires. You have no window into his mind or his soul or his personality at all. And that is really the biggest failure of Chrono Cross, in my opinion. I like the game, but in my opinion, that's the biggest failure of it as a story. And I think if Yuji Horii had been involved with Chrono Cross, he would have directed them away from that decision to make Serge so important to the story despite being a silent protagonist. So that's what I mean. You can't have the main character be vital to the story if they are not going to speak. Dragon Quest kind of does this. The stories are not as complicated as something like Chrono Cross, so you don't feel it quite as much. But like the Luminary in Dragon Quest XI is a completely silent, personalityless drone throughout the entire game. But he is the most important boy in the world, right? Like I said, the story is not as big of a focus in that sort of convoluted Chrono Crossy kind of way, so it doesn't matter as much, but it is still discombobulating, let's say. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that future Dragon Quest games should have the main character just have their own personality and go off and say whatever they want and just be fully scripted. I'm not saying we need to take that big of a leap. What I am suggesting is something like Metaphor did, right? Where your character is not a silent protagonist, but you do choose everything the main character says. And when you make a choice about what the main character says, an actor voices those lines so that it doesn't create this weird dichotomy within a scripted scene where other characters are talking, you're making a silent selection, and then the characters respond as if somebody said something. I think that Metaphor's answer to this is the best compromise of a voiceless protagonist versus a player avatar protagonist, right? And this will just allow for richer stories because if you have a protagonist that is involved and can be more involved in the storytelling, that makes a better story. Just always makes a better story. Another thing that I would like to see in future Dragon Quest games is maybe a little more nuance to the villains. So in basically every mainline Dragon Quest game, the villain is some being of pure evil. Just the worst of the worst, a demon, a lord of darkness, just the worst thing that could be. And there's just not a lot that's super interesting to me about that type of character. They want to rule the world or destroy the world, just the most basic kind of Saturday morning cartoon motivations. It was fine, I guess, when I was a kid, although I actually really started appreciating more nuanced and interesting characters, even back as far as the Super Nintendo era. But, these characters that are so cartoonishly evil, they just don't really appeal to me anymore. And I think that if Dragon Quest wanted to take a big step towards broadening its reach and, doing something new, kind of reinvigorating the series, having a more nuanced villain would be an important step along that path. And there's no reason there's no reason that you need to get rid of truly evil characters. Like, they can factor into the story for sure. Like, not everything needs to be about the main villain. There can be truly evil characters and monsters that show up, why not? Like that could make for some interesting storytelling beats as well. Like Dragon Quest has always been really good about telling little self-contained stories within the broader overall narrative, right? Like, so you could have some truly evil people and monsters be worked into the story, but I would just like to see a main villain whose motivations aren't just cartoony. Right? I could probably go on for hours, but I shouldn't. I should stop at some point. So those are some thoughts I have about Dragon Quest's possible future. Let me know down in the comments if you have any ideas for how Dragon Quest could change. Like, if you don't think that it should change, let's talk about that down there too. If you have reasons why you think the tradition should be upheld to the utmost, no matter what, regardless of who's in charge of the series, let's talk about that down there in the comments as well. I'm open to that discussion. I just am someone who has never been particularly married to the idea of tradition for tradition's sake. Like, I'm fine with traditions that serve a purpose beyond themselves, right? Beyond just kind of continuing themselves, a tradition. And I don't have a problem with traditions that just exist for themselves, but I don't feel beholden to them, right? Like, I don't feel like Dragon Quest has to stay the same because it's always been the same. I feel like it could change, and that might be cool. It might be worth a try. Now, I think an argument, and it's a pretty compelling one if I'm honest, is that, well, Final Fantasy has changed itself so many times over the years, and people have been pretty upset about that for like the last, 20 years now. Like, it's been really a divisive kind of series because of all the changes they've made. Fair point. I think you could make an argument for that. But I also think that there's a right way to make changes, a right way to, guide a series towards change without necessarily rug pulling everything, which is kind of the approach that Final Fantasy took and has taken, with every new game being kind of drastically different than the one before it. I think there's a way to guide change. And I do think that through some of the remakes and, some of the, well, I guess we can only really say through Dragon Quest III HD 2D, although the Game Boy Color remakes of the games did change some things as well. But there has been a little bit of a nudge towards some changes. So I think that it's possible to do that. But anyway, let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you wouldn't mind liking the video, subscribing, I really appreciate that. And also check out my podcast, the JRPG Pursuit. We put up new episodes every single Wednesday morning, all about JRPGs. So check out the link down in the description for that. Anyway, that's all for now. Until next time. Bye.